It's been a long reign of terror, but it's finally time to take back control of the skies from the foul Xenos. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel where we work to get the best out of your miniatures on the tabletop. Today we're going to be doing something a bit different and looking at the various ways to counter these scary Eldar flyers, which have been really quite strong and scary threats in the meta for the last year or so. These things have lightning fast movement, heavy firepower, and for many armies are near impossible to hit due to the stacking -1 modifiers, and can be a real challenge to deal with for new and experienced players alike. We'll be looking at it from a mainly Adeptus Astartes point of view, but I'll try and include as many general tips as possible for countering this menace. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'd say that the first most important thing is to understand what you're dealing with in the Eldar flyers. You might see them run as part of a greater Eldar list, or you might wind up facing off against the extremely scary threat that's a list that revolves around Eldar flyers, where you might get anywhere between 5 and 10 of them in the same list. These ones in particular are a real pain to deal with, due to the concept of threat saturation, which I did make a video on. You might have the type of firepower that can down 1 Eldar flyer per turn. So if you have 3 of them, they'll be gone in 3 turns. If you have 10 of them, then you're never going to get there. These Eldar flyer heavy lists will often be accompanied by a ground-based psyker or two, typically Farseers and Warlocks casting things like Doom or Jinx, and maybe a few small squads like Rangers to contest some ground objectives and to get some command points. People quite like to mix both Craftworld Eldar flyers and Dark Eldar flyers. From the Craftworld section, you'll often be fighting against Hemlock Wraith fighters, close range auto-hitting strength 10 damage 2 guns, and the power to either smite or cast Jinx or something similar. Crimson Hunters toting 2 Bright Lancers and a Pulse Laser, or Crimson Hunter Exarchs with Star Cannons and Pulse Laser. These are all toughness 6 and often run as a Laytok for the extra -1 to hit outside of 12 inches. This synergizes very well with the natural -1 to hits they have with flyers, meaning that typically you'll be on -2 to hit these planes, which is just absolutely crippling if you're using armies with low ballistic skill, such as for example your typical guard tank will be hitting them only on a 6, which completely destroys their efficiency to deal with them. On the Drukhari side, you'll often see the Razorwing jet fighter with disintegrators, splinter rifles and missiles, or the Void Raven bomber with its signature Void Lance. These guys are also toughness 6, they'll only typically be -1 to hit, and they'll often be run as Blackheart for the 6-up Feel No Pain. These guys also get a 5-up invul save as well, as do basically all Dark Eldar vehicles, but fortunately they will be only -1 to hit, at least most of the time. All the Eldar flyers are very manoeuvrable. Unlike most flyers, they can both pivot before and after movement, meaning that they have really good control of where they end up compared with most flyers, and are a lot harder to make fly off the table. This does mean that you could potentially have the Eldar flyers just turning 180 degrees over the course of their 2 pivots, so they could quite happily bounce from one position back to the position they've came from and back again. This combined with their massive movement means that they're going to be able to end up where they want. Now this army has received a few nerfs in recent times. Firstly, they can no longer benefit from prepared positions as they have the aircraft special rule. This means that if your opponent uses that stratagem and they're going second, then the planes will still only have a 3-up save. They no longer block movement in the movement phase, meaning that you can walk under them provided you end the move greater than 1 inch away from the base. This is a nice help as it means that planes aren't quite as good at move blocking things on the ground, though they can still represent a real hindrance to movement, particularly for large squads who might not all be able to get to the other side of the plane. A balance change last year also meant that Guide and Doom no longer affect the Dark Eldar weapons, so if Guide and Doom are going off to reroll wounds and -1 to your save on a particular unit, only the actual Craftworld Eldar planes will benefit, which is a helpful buff. And finally, Chapter Approved 2019 did increase the points cost on the Razorwing and the Crimson Hunter variants, so it remains to be seen if we're going to be seeing this build quite as much going forward into the future. They did, however, receive some buffs in Psychic Awakening Phoenix Rising. In particular, the Eldar planes benefited. The Crimson Hunter Exarchs can swap out their reroll 1's Exarch power for a +1 to hit, I believe, which is pretty much flatly better against most targets. The new Craftworld traits available also mean that they have new options and might not always be played as a Laytok, though a Laytok does remain very strong. They gained Expert Crafters, the Eldar version of Master Artisans, to allow you to reroll one hit and wound roll per turn. This is particularly vicious when we're talking about Bright Lances or Star Cannons and things. There's also a Craft World trait to ignore cover, which can be combined with Master Artisans for some hilariously destructive plain firepower, and I believe that they have an equivalent of the Raven Guard stealthy type trait, where they get to be in cover if you're greater than 12 inches away from them. So I do suspect we'll be seeing some lists that take advantage of those traits. So those are the Eldar planes. Let's move on to the common ways to deal with them. Firstly and most obviously, the normal way would be to shoot them out of the sky. If you're going this route, then you need to have multiple guns that can efficiently take down Eldar planes, and there's a whole bunch of things that will help you overcome their defensive barriers. Firstly, the most common strength guns that will do well against them will typically be strength 4, 6 and 7, as these are the strength guns that get into the bracket for wounding toughness 6 on a 5 up, 4 up and 3 up respectively. Particularly strength 7 guns will be great against them, as they're not paying for additional points of strength that won't actually give them any better chance to wound, so you're likely not going to be paying anywhere near as much for them as you would say for a las cannon at strength 9. Ideally you'll want your weapons to be multi-damage and at least AP-1, though ideally AP-2, and of course more if you can get it efficiently. It means that auto cannons, Leviathan storm cannons, and anything else that's higher strength, higher AP and higher damage will all do very well. Next, you also want these things to be high ballistic skill, so ideally hitting on 2s or 3s. As we mentioned earlier, if you're hitting only on 4s, then being -2 to hit for most of these flyers will mean that you're hitting only on 6s, so you've lost 66% of your damage output there. If you compare that to, say, something that would have been hitting on 2s normally, you'll only drop down to hitting on 4s. That's still quite a hefty chunk out of your damage, but it only takes 40% out of your damage output, so high ballistic skill things really help when countering the negative ballistic skill modifiers. So things like Venerable Dreadnoughts, Contemptor Dreadnoughts, Knight Commander Pask for Imperial Guard, and Leviathan Dreadnoughts, presuming they can get in range, are all good. You can also access higher ballistic skill via various modifiers available to you. For Space Marines, these would be things like Tor Garadon or Phyros' Signum Array to give a squad ballistic skill 2 up. The new Master of Machines Warlord trait for Tech Marines from Faith and Fury. This gives +1 to all vehicles within 6 inches of him and is frankly very strong. Chaplain Litanies are also another valid option. Having +1 to hit certainly helps counter out the -1s to hit, and you can even stack these on things that would have hit on 2-ups naturally, meaning that the dreaded -2 to hit only goes down to a 3 to hit. Also, anything that naturally has a +1 to hit against flyers is of course awesome. Particularly for Space Marines, I'm thinking things like the Stalker, the Hunter, and the Stormhawk Interceptor. Quite a lot of factions do have access to a dedicated anti-air platform, though not all of them, unfortunately. Next, any access to full rerolls to hit is really helpful. I'm talking about things that are any rerolls of rolls to hit, not just failed ones which won't be able to reroll after modifiers. So things like the new Space Marine Chapter Master wording, the Ultramarines Seal of Oath, and even just Master Artisans for being able to reroll 1 hit of any type will certainly chip in to help against these. Obviously any source of rerolls will help your damage output, but the ones with full rerolls to hit will be the ones that will be extra effective against Eldar flyers. For example, if you are hitting the Eldar flyer on a 5 after modifiers, with full rerolls it will go up to hitting over half of the time, which is a lot better frankly. If they are using either the Elatok trait or Stealthy, then you need to be able to get in 12-inch range if at all possible. Now Eldar planes do generally have quite long range and might be able to keep back out of your range, but things like the Hemlock Wraithfighter in particular needs to get close to use its guns. If you can move a bit forward without compromising anything else, then popping yourself just inside 12-inch range can be great to give yourself an extra boost to the firepower. I used this with a forward Vindicator to good effect recently, and between that and Master Artisans it almost blew a Wraithfighter straight out of the sky with a decent roll on the main gun. Speaking of range, long-range guns are also great, combining with what we've said before on a lot of things like the Stalker's Icarus Storm Cannons, Venerable or Contemptor Dreadnoughts with autocannons or las cannons, maybe even Suppressors with their autocannons, will all be able to do solid work. Long range is really important because it means that you can focus down one flyer at a time. rather than having to have your units all shoot at the flyer that's closest to them because they have too short range, and therefore running the dangerous risk of not killing any of them. Focusing fire is very important, but unfortunately the Eldar planes do have a potential counter to this. Lightning fast reflexes is a 2 command point stratagem that they can use, either for Dark Eldar or Eldar flyers, and this can just flatly give them another -1 to hit on that plane. If the Eldar player is playing intelligently, then he'll use it just as soon as you've allocated a large amount of firepower to one of his planes. This could potentially bump it up to a -3 to hit, which is going to be hard to shift even for the best firepower. To help counteract this, you should probably save your biggest heavy hitters to the end. So if the Eldar player really wants to, say, use his lightning fast reflexes when you fire your Leviathan Dreadnought at the planes, they'll have to sit through all the rest of my shooting phase as I focus down planes that haven't had lightning fast reflexes apply, or if they use it then I can just switch to another target with my heaviest firepower and try and ignore the stratagem altogether. Finally, in terms of anti-flyer firepower, it's quite important that you don't have all of your eggs in one basket. If, say, you've got a list that doesn't really do very well against flyers, and you've just thrown in 2 Stalkers tanks to make sure that your list is covered against them, then guess which tanks will be taken out first turn if the Eldar player goes first. If you do come up against a whole load of flyers, it's kind of important that you have multiple threats that can take them out, so they can't just focus down your anti-air turn 1. And spend the rest of the game cleaning your ground troops as they flail around with firepower that's nowhere near suited to taking out aeroplanes. Talking of multiple threats, we can also potentially deal with Eldar flyers in close combat too. Smash Captains are a really solid counter to Eldar flyers when used right, particularly of the Blood Angels variety, who can use on wings of fire to jump up into the sky, come down right next to one, hopefully charge it, kill it, and maybe even fight again to kill another one in the same turn if they're too close together. The Smash Captains, this is captains with a Jump Pack, Storm Shield, Thunderhammer, get round those -1 to hit modifiers which makes them so tough, so can do a horrendous amount of damage if they get a combat phase or 2 with the flyers. Be wary about bringing them in, as Eldar do have an intercept stratagem that allows a unit near a Farseer to gun down a unit that has just arrived from reserve. So if you are using Smash Captains to come down next to flyers, make sure that there's another unit that's nearer to the unit near the Farseer, so they don't have a chance to just kill your Smash Captain with that unit. I should probably have mentioned when we were talking about guns that auto-hitting weapons can also be quite good for getting over -1 to hit modifiers. I'm personally of the opinion that when everyone says that flamers are really effective against flyers, it's a bit of a meme. You do need an absolute ton of flamer fire to actually burn down flyers from the sky. Just 1 or 2 flamers or heavy flamers in squads just isn't going to do anything at all. The only real flamer units that I realistically use out of Codex Space Marines would be Raven Guard Assault Centurions deep striking near the flyers, with the successor trait that makes those flamers 11-inch range. If they come in turn 2 in Tactical Doctrine, then you'll be looking at 42 auto hits with strength 4 and AP -1. So about 7 wounds on an Eldar flyer on average before you've taken into account the Hurricane Bolters, which might well finish it off. Salamanders also well known for their flamers, and a drop pod full of Stern Guard veterans with flamers or convy flamers is certainly a decent shout, particularly as they can access +1 to wound from flamers from multiple sources. So with their unique doctrine and Crucible of War for another +1 to wound, they could be wounding the Eldar flyers on 3s. With AP1 flamers, so that could be another silly way to burn planes from the sky. While we're talking of auto-hitting things, Smite isn't such a bad idea either. It's certainly not going to get rid of planes by itself, but if you do have a Psyker present on the field of battle, throwing a few more Smites into planes will over the course of the game do some significant damage. Plus having denials on the board for the Psyker to deny the important powers of Doom and Jinx can be the difference between winning or losing a game. There's one more situational way to kill flyers, and that's to try and make them fly off the board. Now this is very hard to do with Eldar flyers because they can turn after they have moved, so are typically going to have a very large amount of the table that they're going to be able to fly into, even if they've flown right up to your army, which they don't even have to do. Typically this isn't ever going to work as Space Marines, as you just don't have enough units to block off areas of the board for the flyers to land on. But if you're playing a Horde army such as Imperial Guard or Orcs in the right circumstances, there might be situations where you can literally see where a flyer will have to land after turning, and move a bunch of units or deep strike some units to take up all the space that they could land, as they can't move within 1 inch of you. If there's nowhere on the board that the flyer can land, then it will automatically be destroyed, so you have the potential to kill some flyers without ever shooting at them. That being said, I have played Eldar flyers a lot of times, and I've never had the situation where I might be able to do this. So something to look out for, but it's not realistically going to come up very much against experienced generals. If you're not able to kill them or gun them down for whatever means, then the other option you have is to play the objective game and try and score as many points as you can before the Eldar flyers wipe you out. If you're doing this, then obviously take any free easy kills that you can on the Eldar flyers, maybe just focus on gunning down 1 to lessen their firepower over the course of the game, but remember that your main objective is to outscore the enemy. Delete any ground units, use snipers if possible to gun down Farseers and Warlocks, and have your units dig in out of line of sight where possible, and just score objectives each turn. I've had one memorable game in particular where I realised that I couldn't kill the Eldar flyers after turn 1. Focused just on killing 1 with my remaining firepower, and spent the rest of the game just using reserves shenanigans as Genestealer cults to put my units down on objectives and kill any Eldar ground troops there, to make sure I was outscoring the Eldar player each turn. This proved so effective that we managed to get a max win in the tournament for that game, despite, in terms of kills, the Eldar players being all over us. Certainly think about using any line of sight blocking ruins, or any magic boxes that might be around if you're playing ITC rules, to stop the Eldar planes from having any opportunity to fire at vulnerable ground targets that can't do them any damage. They can either just prevent themselves from being free kill points, or you can choose to get them out of cover at the exact moment when you need to score that objective, say if you're playing a Maelstrom mission. So here are a few of my Space Marine top picks for killing Eldar flyers. First of all, we have the trusty Hunters and Stalkers. Both of these are very tough at toughness 8, even the flyers themselves are going to struggle to remove these tanks. Having +1 to hit is great, particularly on top of the already great Ballistic Skill 3 up, and their Skyfire stratagem, particularly used on the Stalker, will absolutely chew through planes. Smash Captains are also great for the reasons we've mentioned. They might either be able to scare the planes from getting anywhere near you, or drop down from reserve to hopefully take one out. Stormhawk Interceptors are probably one of the hardest counters to Eldar flyers they are, being toughness 7, -1 to hit for the flyers themselves, and also getting a +1 to hit against flyers. They've also got a lot of guns that are medium strength and decent at taking down these planes, and particularly in Iron Hands and Imperial Fists, they're pretty good against most of the meta anyway. Finally, any long-range Dreadnought with a ballistic skill of 2 up is also a solid pick. Particularly I'm thinking things like Contemptor Mortis Dreadnoughts, which are solid all-round firepower, with those lovely autocannons, or perhaps even Leviathans with storm cannons, obviously provided you can get range, as those storm cannons are only 24 inches. If there's anything that I've missed, or you have any other insights yourself in how to deal with these planes, please let me know down in the comments. Space Marines are certainly very lucky with having multiple ways to deal with them now. Many armies just aren't that lucky, and they do remain a very solid choice against the majority of the field. If you've liked this video, feel free to subscribe. I release tactics related videos every day, mainly of a Space Marine type nature at the moment, though we are looking to move on to some Imperial Guard soon. Feel free to support my Patreon if these videos are of use to you, as they do take a while to make. Again, thanks for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.